and welcome to my channel. I am excited to go over today. I'm talking about the biggest disappointments that I read in 2023. So, my last video, worst books, like don't read them, please. Save yourself the mental anger and anguish. Don't read those books. This is going to be interesting because some of these books on my list are books that I really did enjoy, but I had really high expectations or just this whole other idea in terms of what I was stepping into when I picked up the book, and it definitely fell short of my expectations or wasn't at all what I was thinking. So I'm kind of excited to chat through these. So I have 6 books on here. Well, one's a series in entirety that kind of make up the biggest disappointments of 2023. So let's dive in. Okay, so as always, we've got my notes. So first on the list is, I want to preface this by saying, again, a lot of these books are books that I do enjoy. They didn't meet my expectations, right? So first on my list is The War of Two Queens. War of Two Queens. Last time I did the books over here, and I don't know why. So we're going back to this side. The War of Two Queens. This is book 4 in the From Blood and Ash series. I love the From Blood and Ash series. If you're not familiar with it, it is a vampire series. It is very, very dense. Like, it is a very deeply written political structure. There's all kinds of beings. Some of them have similar names, very similar in terms of how they are with slight differences. There's like the Ascended, the Vampires, and of course now my mind is blanking, but there's gods and then primals, humans, halflings. There's like a whole bunch of beings, right? It is a very dense book just from the world building. And then there's a lot of political stuff going on, and there's a war going on. So this series, I love it. It's probably a little slower than what a lot of people like, and it picks up in action. Actually, this book is where a lot of the action picks up because it kind of is coming to this main like head point. So I can't remember how many more books she's writing in this series, but it's book 4 is where it really came to a main pivotal point. So if you think about any other longer series that you've read, and I mean series that are probably like 5 books plus, usually there's like 2 main plots. So you have like the first one, which usually takes place over the first couple of books, and that starts to get you to the main plot, which brings you to the end of the series. So book 4, this one, brings us kind of to the end of everything we've been building to for the first 3 books, and it sets it up for how it's going to end and where we're going. So it's a very pivotal book. What I didn't like about this one, there were 2 main things that I was really disappointed in, and I want to say when I was reading this book, I was like, it's a 5, it's a 5, it's a 5, it's so good. But then one of the issues, and I will say one of the tropes of this book is the separation trope. So we have our 2 main love interests, our 2 main characters, and they're separated. And a lot, if you don't like that, this book, it's all separation. Obviously, it comes to some sort of conclusion, but I know a lot of people don't like that. So I know a lot of people already going into this were kind of like, ugh, because it's hard when you get the main characters, they meet, and then they don't like each other, and they like each other again, and they don't like each other, and then for them to be like apart, it can kind of be hard for readers. I don't mind it at all because I think it gives the author opportunity to write the characters to be more independent and have different types of character growth, and that's actually what I didn't like about this one is we have our main female character, Poppy, and then Castile. They're separated, and then you have Kieran, who is Castile's best friend. He's a Wolven. Again, lots of crazy names. And Kieran and Poppy are together in this book. Like, they're in the same plot, essentially. But their interactions really weirded me out. Like, it just didn't feel authentic to the love story between Poppy and Castile, and it was just kind of strange. And I think one of the things is all the books leading up to this, Kieran, he's a wolf who has a human form, but we really interact with him in his human form and we get to know him as a human. So it feels more the reverse, right? It feels like he's a human who can shift. But in reality, I think if I remember correctly how it's written, the Wolven were actually, they kind of evolved to have human forms and they bond with other humans. But the wolf form, I think, is their natural form. And I could get that wrong. But I think that's kind of how it is. But it just felt weird. Like Poppy and Kieran have like a lot of weird moments where I'm like, that's an interesting choice. And then there's this really weird, interesting thing at the end of the book. And because this is spoiler free, I will not get into it. But if you've read the book, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. And I hated it. I was like, this is not the point of these books. These are supposed to be, a fantasy romance with a lot of political things going on, intense world building, a war, and like this just, there was a moment at the end that just felt really distracting, and it felt like she was just trying to like fulfill weird fantasies, and not my thing. So that really disappointed for me, I was really disappointed in it for kind of those interactions. The other thing was the ending. And the ending was wonderful. Like the ending itself was great. The problem with the ending is when I say these books are intense, they're difficult to get through and they can be hard to understand because there's a lot of structure. The ending was too complex and it was kind of hard to understand. Like you have the main villain, she has motives, but then her motives kind of change. Like someone needs to die and then she flips it. She's like, just kidding, this other person needs to die. And the way she explains it, I guess it makes sense, but it's so nuanced and so particular and it was kind of hard to understand. It felt really, really messy. Now, I will say there is the prequel series, the Flesh and Fire series, and if you read that, it kind of helps clear things up, I think, in terms of where we ended in this book. It gives a little bit of a better understanding in terms of where we're going and a better understanding in terms of what the heck is going on, because she, like I said, there's things happening and it's super confusing, and like I said, I don't quite understand the motivations with the villain and like the repercussions of the actions, so it just felt really sloppy, but I do think the prequel does a good job at kind of clearing that up a little bit. And the prequel books are fantastic. I actually like the prequel book so far better than the From Blood and Ash book. So if you like From Blood and Ash, I recommend reading the prequel series. I think it will help clear up this book. But again, I enjoyed this book. It was disappointing. Because I thought, especially reading it, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so good. And then it slowly went downhill, and I was like, ooh, I wish it could have been a little cleaner and a little less weird in some of the character interactions, but it is what it is. So that is The War of Two Queens. Next up on my list is the Folk of the Air trilogy. I'll just put the first one here. So it's 3 books: The Cruel Prince, The Wicked King, and The Queen of Nothing. So overall, I just want to preface this because this is a super popular book series. I want to preface this by saying I did really enjoy it. I thought it's very hard in a trilogy to feel like the pacing, the character development, and the plot is consistent across all 3 books or all the books in a series. And I felt like each book had a lot of good plot points, character development, surprises, and they all felt fulfilling. Like I didn't feel like it dragged anywhere. I didn't feel like it was messy or anything was rushed. Like I thought the pacing of the series as a whole was really well done, and that's hard. So I applaud her for that. This makes my list though because I think overall it had to do again with my expectations, because overall I think I have huge issues with shelving books in different genres. So for example, I went back to look to see where the series landed in my order of books that I read. And so I actually read this after I read ACOTAR, then I read From Blood and Ash, and then I read this. And there were some other book series and other books in between. However, ACOTAR, for example, is shelved as young adult, and it's not. And I am a very big believer, like, just because your characters are younger in age doesn't mean it's young adult. Just because you have no spice or low spice, that doesn't make it young adult. Like, you can still have an adult book with minimal to no spice and younger aged characters. So I think I think a lot of books are getting misshelved. For example, I actually am a firm believer that The Hunger Games is not a young adult book. I think The Hunger Games is very much an adult book that deals with really intense themes. It's very grotesque, and it gets progressively grotesque. Like, there's a scene in book 3 where characters have literally had wires shot through them, and they're hanging, and they're covered in boiling hot black tar. So I'm like, I get that the characters are younger and there's like the love triangle going on. It's not young adult though. So I do think young adult gets thrown around out there. And I went into the Folk of the Air series kind of having these feeling like it would be similar to ACOTAR and From Blood and Ash, although I don't think From Blood and Ash has ever been shelved as young adult. I think that's always been new adult, or just flat out adult. So I was shocked I felt it was really juvenile, and it really is a young adult book. Like, like the characters, the way they interact, there's, it does feel very high school-esque, the way they speak, the things they do, and like they are of that age too, so it makes sense. But I went into this thinking it was going to be great because so many people were raving about it, and I was like, it's going to be amazing. And even the world, it felt like whimsical and kind of quirky, and I just didn't fit at all what I was expecting. So if you're going into this series thinking it's going to be along some of these other popular book series, I want to warn you, this one actually does feel young adult, where some of the other books I feel like don't feel young adult because they're not young adult. This one definitely feels YA. The only other thing that I put on here too is that it's a bully romance, and it was hard to believe. And bully romance, I don't read a lot of bully romances. I hate bully romances, but from my minimal experience with them, I can see how bully romance can be made to be believable and make sense. This one just didn't, and I feel like some of it had to do with the young adultness to the book, and it's marketed as young adult, but a lot of people who like it also like the other books and series that I enjoy. So I was really surprised, and it was really quite distracting to me how juvenile I felt it was. And it, like I said, overall, I think I gave the first book 4 stars, and then the other books 3 maybe, or maybe it was like 3 and then a 4 and then a 3 or something like that. But either way, like, I still rated them really well. I remember, I think I was so shocked because it wasn't at all what I was expecting. And I don't know where the book is. I have the next one that came out, How the King of Elfheim Learned to Hate Stories. And like, again, like there's illustrations and things, but it kind of reminded me of like Harry Potter and how there were like other, like the Tales of Beedle the Bard came out. And so it didn't measure up to my expectations in terms of the maturity, I would say. And it is still so fun. Like, I really did enjoy it. I just think I went into it with a completely different mindset in terms of what it was. So that is the Folk of the Air series. I still recommend it. Just know it is definitely on the young adult spectrum for sure. Okay. Next up on my list, this is actually not a very well-known series at all. It's by J.D. Linton. It's called The Last Draig, or Draig. We all know I can't pronounce things to save my life. We're going with Draig, even though it's probably Draig, but I'm sticking with Draig because now I've just got to own it. So this is book 2 in a series that so I read the first book, which is called The Last Storm. And reading that book, I really thought that the author said it was going to be a duet. 2 books, that's it. But it's clear after reading this one, it's going to be 3 books. And this is a classic case of it's a trilogy that should have been 2 books. Because it's not that well known, I do have like a little bit of details about it. So this takes place in this kind of stereotypical the setup of a plot in terms of we have the humans and we have the Fae. They're kind of at war with each other. Not kind of, like they are at war with each other. The Fae are painted as the villains, as the bad guys, but I'm sure we'll all be shocked to find out things aren't exactly as they seem, right? Our main character, Ara, she's like a little bit more of a free spirit, and like I think she's kind of a fighter too, and she is royalty and she's kept inside, not allowed to go out, a fear of Fae kidnapping her and taking her. And of course, the Fae King comes and kidnaps her. That's what happens. And then takes her back to his land. And then, of course, things are not at all as they seem. And we learn, of course, as hidden identities, it has the enemies to lovers. And this actually is a true enemies to lovers, I would say. Like, the main characters are definitely enemies. I think there are situations where books are, they say they have the enemies to lovers trope, but only one person dislikes the other. And so that's not true enemies to lovers. In this instance, they both hate each other in the beginning. And so I actually find that fun because I think the enemies to lovers trope gets thrown out there way too much incorrectly. If one person doesn't like the other, it doesn't make them enemies. They both have to loathe the other in order to make them enemies. So, and that is this. And it was so fun. The first book was so good. It had some stereotypical plot points that you would see in a Fae type of book. And I think I ended up giving it a 4, and I even said I thought it was a little predictable, but it just made me smile. I really enjoyed the banter between the two characters, and the book really did accomplish a lot, which is why when we get to book 2, I'm disappointed because this book dragged. No pun intended, the last drag, it dragged. It was just really drawn out. Not a lot of plot happened. Not a lot of character development really happened either. The ending was phenomenal, and I think we are going to get to a really fun book 3, and we're going to pick the pacing right back up. The problem is the villain and kind of endgame that we are introduced to in this book is also kind of mentioned in book 1, and I think the author could have extended book 1 maybe a little bit, maybe not even, but this book 2, could have totally been what book 3 is going to be. All of book 2 could have taken place, could have been 25%. It literally, not much happens. You cut that book down to 25%, just the key plot points, and that's the first 25% of, the next book, and then you have the big ending and all that stuff happen. But it's definitely a case of this really should have been a duology, and it's being dragged on. And so I do want to mention that because the first book was so fun, and I believe it's a Kindle Unlimited book, and I do highly recommend it. It's by an indie author. I'm pretty sure she's an indie author, so I really do recommend it. But if you read the first one, and if you love it like me, and get to the second one, you're like, Morgan, you're crazy. I can't continue reading this. I know, but I really do think that book 3 is going to be more in line with how book 1 was. So I think we should stick it out. I'm certainly sticking it out. It didn't deter me from the series at all. I had such high expectations and definitely were not met. So that is the last Draig. Who knows? But that's it. Okay, next on my list, this is another indie author, and this is a must-read author for me, Jenna Wolfhart. She wrote, I talked about it in my, the best books of 2023. She wrote a series called The Fallen Fae, which I loved. And then, of course, I picked up her next series when I picked it up, she was in the process of writing it. And she just actually finished it, I think, at the end of 2023. And I read the whole series. But it is the Mist King series. And it is a 4-book series. And my disappointment is book 3, which is Of Night and Chaos. And just like the last series I talked about, it's exactly the same thing. It was a 4-book series that should have been three books. This book dragged. It was very, very little happened in it, and then the ending of it brought us into like a whole new part of the world. And at least I'm pretty sure, yes, it brought us into a whole new part of the world, brought new characters to light. And so it really set up book 4, which is the last book, to accomplish a lot. And it sure did. I really enjoyed book 4. I thought book 4 was wonderful and really did a good job at picking up the pace from book 3. But again, it's a classic case of like, there was not enough in this book. And if I remember correctly, these books I wouldn't say they're big, but I think they're between 300 to 500 pages. So That's a lot of pages for not a lot to happen, but I do recommend the series. I do have like the blurb, so I will read the blurb to give you an idea in terms of what it's about. So, and this is from book 1, because again, there's no plot spoilers. Because if I gave you the overview for this book, it would clearly spoil the first 2 books. So I'm not going to do that. But when the vicious Fae King catches Tessa stealing his powerful gemstones, he demands a cruel punishment. She must leave her family and friends behind and become his future human bride. But when she escapes, someone far worse finds her, the lethal Mist King, the enemy Fae who trapped her people beneath the reign of King Oberon in the first place, the one who destroyed human cities and watched them burn. So she is this human who was forced to be a human bride for this like terrible, awful Fae guy, escapes him to then be caught up with another terrible, awful Fae guy. And of course, we have humans. So I do like the progression in terms of unveiling the world. Like, we're not hit with it. It's not like Crescent City where you're hit with everything in 2 chapters of the first book. It is, we start learning about humans, and then we're going to learn a little bit about the Fae, and then we learn more and more and more. The problem was what we learned in book 3. What we really learned in book 3 took place in the last 50 pages of the book. The rest of book 3 was kind of a waste, and that's what this is. So this makes my list of biggest disappointments because, again, this is a series that should have been 3 books, I think, especially considering they're very lengthy. She definitely could have cut some stuff down, and at the end, I really did enjoy it. I thought she did a good job. It was a fun series, and I do recommend it. But considering they're so large, it can really feel like it's dragging on. To have to get through 400 pages for almost nothing to happen, that's painful. So again, fabulous series. Do recommend it. But book 3 was a big disappointment for me and just didn't give me enough. And I really wish, I wish authors could just figure out how to properly figure out how many books their series should be. Should it be 2? Should it be 3? Should it be 4 or 5? I don't know, but I feel like sometimes they try to drag it on when it shouldn't, or they make it way too short and it feels so unfulfilling. And it's I'm sure it's like this, it's a balance to try to do that correctly. And when it's not done correctly, it really does show. So again, she's a must-read author for me. I still gave most of these books 3.5, 4. I think my highest one might have been 4.5. No, it was 4. I remember correctly, but still really enjoyable. But yeah, just dragged. So that is Of Night and Chaos. My next book is, this breaks my heart to say it, but it is A Curse for True Love. This is the 3rd book in the Once Upon a Broken Heart series by Stephanie Garber. I also have it on my bookshelf over here. I have 4 copies of it because my husband knew I was obsessed with The Ballad of Never After and was just the best husband ever and signed me up for a book signing with Stephanie Garber, and I traveled to New York City to meet her and get the book on release day. Excuse me, actually, I got the book the day before it released. He ordered me all kinds of special editions, and preface this, I did love the book because I loved the series. However, it was definitely a disappointment. So this series, it follows a young human girl named Eva. She's got bubblegum pink or rose gold hair, I should say. And she kind of teams up with this mythical creature. He's a fate. It's different magic. It's not like a traditional fae or vampire or monster type of thing. It's just a classical fantasy book. It has very fairy tale-esque whimsical vibes. It just feels bubblegum pink to me. And it's happy and it's joyful. But a lot of, crazy stuff happens that isn't happy or joyful. But I love the main character, Eva. She's just this human girl who's looking for a happily ever after and just wants to find peace and love in life. And she's dealt a whole lot of crazy stuff and just she deals with it as best she can. I've done a review of the series previously, and one of the things I say, which definitely holds true, is that I really appreciate it when the main female character is just a regular woman and not this kung fu fighter master who can shoot wolves from miles away through the eye and just has happened to be skilled in every weapon possible, greatest assassin by age 17. And as much as I enjoy those, there's something a lot more endearing and relatable when the character, isn't this really intense female badass for all intents and purposes. So I really do recommend the series. It's so fun. The problem with this book is she introduced a whole lot. First of all, it had my least favorite trope, which is the amnesia trope. So it was always going to be set up. It's interesting. Amnesia trope, when you end a book with an amnesia trope starting, it's such a huge impact, which is what happened in Ballad of Never After, one of my favorite books of all time. But then, of course, it sets it up for me to dislike the next book. So I knew going into it I was probably going to have a rough time. The problem was is she introduced a lot of new characters. There were plot points that weren't quite fully developed. It moved kind of quickly at some points, and then like the ending with really epic things happening that she had to really write well, because she kind of wrote herself, if you've read her other series, the Caraval series, she wrote herself into a hole in that one. I won't go through it here because I don't want any spoilers, but she had a lot of creative writing she had to do at the end of this book, and I felt like the ending was so rushed. It was actually interesting because I was thinking about it recently. I read the Caraval series as well, and I had a similar feeling about the third book, which was Finale. And it was, I loved book 2, Legendary, but then book 3, Finale, introduced a lot of new characters and new types of characters, and I feel like maybe she just has a habit of book 3 bringing too much new information when she should be focusing on having the information she has and just closing it up. If anything, I believe if you have an amnesia trope in a book, the next book should not be the last book. And it's funny because another series I enjoy called the Plated Prisoner series by Raven Kennedy, that has an amnesia trope in it, and the last book is one of our main characters has the amnesia issue thing, and I'm like, I just feel like it's unfair. Like, I kind of wish you introduce the amnesia trope, great. Then we have a book where we get over the amnesia trope, great. And then we have a book to end it all and really bring it all together. And I actually felt like the series needed a fourth book with the amount of new characters and plot she was bringing into it. I thought she could have spent more time, especially if she wants to keep her books similar in sizes. I had originally said she probably needed another 100 pages or so. No, actually, I then thought it through. If she could have kept it the same size, but made 4 books and had another book that really developed the ending well and really finesse some of the pieces that she brought into this book. So this is one where I actually think needed another book because a lot of the stuff in this felt rushed, incomplete. We had new characters who then she did nothing with. We had I think I mentioned it in my other video, a character's blood was drawn and it was supposed to be nothing happened. Where'd the blood go? Where'd the blood go, Stephanie? I don't know. So anyway, I felt like at the end of the day, the ending was very satisfactory for readers, I think, and I thought she did really do a good job in terms of where all the characters ended up. My problem was how she got there wasn't finessed and really, I don't know, like readers really loved Ballad of Never After, and she started getting really big, I think, from this series. And I think if she would have pushed for a fourth book or tried harder, I know she had to rewrite it. I don't know if she rewrote all of it, but I know there was a point in time where the book was delayed and she ended up doing a rewrite. I don't know what kind of pressure she had from her publishers, but is that sometimes some things where indie authors have more say over their books and their plot. So I don't know what went on, but it felt like she wasn't fully in this book. It felt like she was already thinking about her next one, just trying to complete this. And then, of course, she came out with her next book release, which is spectacular, and it's a novella for the Caraval book. So I don't know, I wish I knew what was going on, because I feel like she just wasn't, the book felt like she wasn't fully invested in it, and it felt like she just was ready to get it done with, and that kind of felt sad to me. And that might not be the case at all, but that's just kind of how it felt. So I could talk about this forever because I love this series, but I will not because you will stop watching. So that is A Curse for True Love. Again, totally worth reading the series. I just think Ballad is so incredible, and I just think it's helpful going into A Curse for True Love, lowering your expectations, because I actually think you'll enjoy it more. Because one of the things too, my expectations were so high that it was hard to meet them. So if you go in with lower expectations, I think you'll probably enjoy it a little bit more than I did. So I still gave it a 3.5 out of 5. And the series as a whole, I think, is a 4 for me because that one brought it down. Ugh, rude. How dare you bring it down? But anyway, next up. Okay, so next and last on my list is Foxglove. This is the sequel, Foxglove. This is the sequel to Belladonna by Adeline Grace. This is a gothic. It's not like fantasy, like fae, vampire, monsters, like fairy tale-esque. It's very gothic feel, and kind of, I don't know, like I can't remember like the type of time period. I'm trying to think that this takes place in 1920s, no, not 1920s. I'm not even sure, but it has a very different feel than any of the other typical books that I read or talk about. And It's a sequel to Belladonna, which is a really popular book that had to deal like where Death was the love interest, which was so fun. And there was a murder mystery, and it was just so well done. And I was so excited for Foxglove, and I was obviously disappointed. Otherwise, it wouldn't be here sitting beside me obnoxiously. So, I can't say much about it without giving any main plot points from the first book away, but Death in the first book, I can't even remember our main character's name. Her name isn't Belladonna, I don't think. No, it's not. That would be silly. Belladonna is the name of like a poisonous plant. But you have our main character who like has like all the people in her life have always died, and like Death just follows her, but then she literally actually meets Death, and Death is like has like a human form, and she kind of teams up with Death to try to solve kind of murders, but also clearly the last family that she has that's surviving, because her parents died when she was young and she didn't. And so Death's been following her being like, why the heck didn't you die? You should have died with your parents. All the family around her, every time she goes to like a new like foster home essentially, or another like distant relative thing. If you've ever read the Lemony Snicket series when you were a kid, think about that, where they just get passed on from bad situation to bad situation, weird to weird. They all like die, and the last like remaining family who can take her in are so nice, so kind. She really enjoys them, but the girl who's there, who's like her age, her cousin or second cousin, something like that, is dying. And the mom, I think it was the mom. Yeah, the mom recently died. And so when there's death around, when someone is on the brink of death, Death himself can be present. So because her like cousin is on the brink of death, it allows our main character to actually really interact with Death one-on-one. If there's no Death around, Death can't be there, right? So that's kind of how the author is able to write these two characters being able to have any kind of friendship, relationship, whatever it is you want to call it. And it's so fun. It's so well done. I've read a couple series where Death is the love interest, and I always find it so fascinating because I love seeing how people do it and make it work, in terms of like what Death looks like, the parameters around how someone who is death can interact with someone who is alive. And I just think it's such a good concept. And so Belladonna was so good. Then we had Foxglove, which the problem that I had with Foxglove, I'm going to actually read like my review, because I think my review did a really good job to sum up really how I felt about it. So I did not think this book got interesting or really started picking up until we were 60% through the book. And I know that because I have a Kindle, so it always tells me the percentage. So on my you can't even see it, my Kindle. Yeah, 60%. That's rough. So it was just kind of boring, not a lot. And remember how I said earlier, like in order for Death to be around, in order for our two main characters to interact, someone needs to be dying. Yet people aren't dying. So Death can't really be around. So now we've like fallen in love with this beautiful like friendship relationship that's growing between the two main characters, only for like Death is rarely in the book. And the whole point was how someone could interact with Death as a character. And then like he's barely there, and the focus is on two other characters. And while they're really good and I enjoy them, it just was so disappointing because I really wanted to see more progression between Death and our main female character, and instead the focus was on some other things. And like I said, it didn't pick up to like 60%. I will say usually I'm really good at guessing how things go. There were definitely some things about this book that surprised me. The ending was a little weird. I had to reread it to see if it even made sense, and I guess it does. But I do think the next book will be interesting because the next book, it's called Wisteria. I believe it's coming out this August. What I think the author should do to make it done well, because Death is not the only kind of supernatural being that she writes in these books. So the second book, Foxglove, she introduces a new supernatural being. I think it's Fate, right? And so I think what she needs to do for the next book to be successful, I think she needs to be done with Death and our main character, and I think she needs to focus on the other two characters of this book. So almost book 2, Foxglove, could kind of be a bridge book. So the first book, Belladonna, is about Death and the one main character. The second book, then Death, one main character, introduces Fate and our next main character, and a next main female character. And then book 3 really focuses on Fate, because I do think that I went into this book expecting there to be a lot more development with Death as a character, and he was like the least around in the book series, and it was really hard and it was boring. But I'm still going to keep reading it because I think it is a fascinating idea how she writes these like supernatural beings and how they can interact. Like this Fate character has all of these like woven tapestries which make up lives, and it was fun. And I do think that there's a lot of potential for book 3. I just think going into this one, like it was just so fun seeing how Death and our main character interacted, for that to just not be there. And it's weird because she still wrote them as main characters, right? She didn't write them off, as I feel like she almost should have. Like, I almost feel like she should have handed off the torch to Fate and this other character. Instead, she tried to continue to make them main characters, but, Death just couldn't be. If no one's dying, Death can't be there. So Death really couldn't be there. So, yeah, for things get interesting, it's 60% through. Makes it a little rough, but I still enjoyed it. And I will say, I remember reading Belladonna. I did feel like it was a little slower too at some point. So it is a slower read. Again, there's murder mysteries. There's not a lot of fantasy. There's not like there's a war going on. I mean, there's like, like people are trying to get married. It's kind of like Bridgerton-esque, where like people are being courted, and it kind of has that like feel and like dress type of feel. I actually do think Bridgerton is a good comparison in terms of like society. So it is slower in that regard, but it just was a little too slow for me. So that's it. Those are my biggest disappointments of 2023. And again, I actually still recommend that you read all of them. And, all of them are a part, except Folk of the Air. That's the full series was obviously a disappointment, but I still recommend reading it as long as you go into it knowing this is going to be a little bit on the younger side. But all the other books, I just don't want you to start these amazing series and then get to these books that I found to be super disappointing to then stop the series, because I definitely think for the ones that I've continued on, I think it's worth continuing on. I think there's really good places these authors are going. I don't think some of them should really taint how great previous books in the series were. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed. Of course, comment if I'm totally wrong. You're like, oh my gosh, those were the best books ever. Love to have those kind of discussions. You can follow and message me on Instagram at Morgan in Bookland. And yeah, the next one, I think I'm going to do a review. Who knows? I still have lots of ideas. So might be doing some things like what to read after Sarah J. Maas. I have 2 concepts, one of like what actual books to read, and then like types of books to read. So I think I might do a video too on like really quick reads or quick series when you are done reading the 800-page books that are some of these really popular series. So yeah, I've got a couple fun things in the works, so I hope you stick around, and yeah, thanks for watching.